Okay, welcome everyone. In another hour or so here in Israel begins the 5th of Av, the 5th day of the month of Av, and it is the Yahrtzeit of the Arizal. Rabbi Luria, the great Kabbalist of Tzfat, passed away on the 5th day of Av. And I've had the great merit to be in Tzfat for his Yahrtzeit and been able to be at his kever, at his gravesite, along with thousands of other people. And so tonight we're going to learn about the Arizal and the teachings of the Arizal, and also how it connects to this time of the year. Rav Ginsburg explains that when a tzaddik passes away, the day that they pass away is very significant. And we know one of the greatest examples is, of course, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who passed away on what we now celebrate as Lag BaOmer. And he said also the Arizal, the 5th of Av is the midpoint of the 9 days from Rosh Chodesh Av to Tisha B'Av. And we'll see what we're going to be learning, the significance of it being the middle point of the 9 days where we're taught that we should be mamatim b'simcha. We should lessen our joy or lessen with joy. I don't really think we have time to go into the whole story of the Arizal, but not everyone may know the story. So I'm just going to take 2 or 3 minutes to run through his life very, very quickly. So the Arizal was born in Yerushalayim. If anyone's been in the old city, in the Or Chaim Shul, on the Or Chaim Street, that is where the Arizal had his Brit Milah. And at the age of 5, his father passed away. And his mother was left without any means of support. She had a very, very wealthy brother who lived in Egypt. And so he said, come to Egypt and I'll take care of your family. And he did bring the whole family over. The Arizal, by the time he was a teenager, had mastered all of the revealed Torah. And as a mid to late teen, he was introduced to Kabbalah. And actually, in the end, he married his first cousin, his uncle who was taking care of them. He married his daughter. Very common in those days for first cousins to be married. And for 20 years, he more or less lived in isolation, learning the secrets of the Torah. According to tradition, Eliyahu Navi came and taught him. And at the end of 20 years, he told him, you don't have much longer in the world. You have to go to Tzfat and begin to teach what I've been teaching you. The Arizal was a very, very modest, hidden person, and he actually didn't want to go. He was perfectly happy to sit in isolation and learn from Eliyahu Navi. But Eliyahu Navi said, these teachings need to come into the world. So he said, you really only have to have one student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and you will teach him, and he will teach over your Torah to the world. So the Arizal went to Tzfat, and there are many, many stories, but the absolutely incredible thing is he was only in Tzfat for 2.5 years. And he passed away at a very young age in a plague that swept through Tzfat. But in those 2.5 years, the amount of Torah that he gave over, not just the amount, but the quality and the innovative and the new type of Torah that he was teaching, absolutely revolutionized Jewish thought to this day. And it had all happened in 2.5 years. It's quite incredible. 20 years after the Arizal passed away, his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and really Rabbi Chaim Vital's son, published what's called Kitvei Ha'ari, the volumes of teachings from the Ari. The Ari basically wrote nothing, and as he gave it over to Rabbi Chaim Vital, and we found, and he had about 20 other students that Rabbi Chaim Vital kind of convinced him that he should have more than just him as a student. And on the 5th of Av, he passed away. So what we're going to learn tonight is we're going to learn a teaching from Rav Ginsburg, who took all of the teachings of the Ari and he like simplified it to 4 basic ideas that the Ari gave over. First, we have to know that the teachings of the Ari are highly complex, very, very deep, complicated. Nonetheless, Rav Ginsburg was able to take the entire body of the work of the Arizal and show that there are 4 major ideas that he gave over that run through all of his work. And each one of these in their own way, as I said, revolutionized Jewish thought, because much of what the Ari was teaching had never been taught before. And most of it was actually in the Zohar, but no one had mastered the Zohar like the Arizal. The language of the Zohar and the way it gives over its teachings are very, very abstruse, very symbolic, very hard to really grab onto what is really being taught. And the Ari was able to master it and then give it over. So I'm going to give over these 4 ideas, and I have to give it over in a relatively kind of simple, straightforward way. And then what Rav Ginsburg did is he connected these 4 teachings to the idea that, for those who have been coming to the class, we've talked about already in previous classes, this idea in the Mishnah, which says, Misha nichnas Av mema'atim b'simcha. When the month of Av comes in, we lessen our joy, or we lessen with joy. And Rav Ginsburg then takes these 4 ideas and connects all of them to this idea of lessening. Because he said that in each of these teachings, they're dependent on this concept of lessening. And he wanted to give over this idea that the day on which the Ari passed away was very, very significant. So before we get into the 4, the Ari was asked by his students on what merit did you have to learn these secrets of the Torah that no one had learned before? And his answer was fairly simple. He said, Simcha Mitzvah. I have great joy from doing the mitzvot. There's a concept called the joy of doing a mitzvah. Rav Ginsburg points out this is a little puzzling because many people after the Ari passed away wrote stories about him, firsthand accounts. And from everything that we hear about the Ari, he didn't show on the outside great joy. He wasn't sad or depressed or overly serious, but he wasn't known for great hitlavut, enthusiasm while he was praying or he was doing mitzvah. So Rav Ginsburg explains there's something called Simcha shel Mitzvah, the Simcha of doing a mitzvah. He said, but there is a deeper level of joy that is not dependent even on doing mitzvah. It's the essence of joy, where a person is joyful in a sense for no reason, just meaning that it's kedai, it's a good thing to be joyous, like Rabbi Nachman teaches, mitzvah gadola liot b'simcha tamid. In other words, just the joy to be alive, and not connected to anything other than pure joy. So as we're going to learn this idea of lessening joy, in a sense, can really only happen if you have joy in the first place. You know, if you don't have any joy in your life, God forbid, then how are you going to lessen it? So actually I'll call it paradoxically, during the 3 weeks and the 9 days, it's actually a very special time to connect to the essence of joy in order to be able to somewhat lessen it. Okay, so now let's go to the 4 teachings from the Arizal. Some of them you will be familiar with, and therefore I'm not going to dwell on them that much. But the first one is the idea called Simpson of Contraction. And this is the whole cosmology. The Ari came up with this very symbolic, yet very, in a sense, very accurate description of the creative process. In other words, how did it come that an infinite God, beyond time and space, so much beyond time and space, there was no time or space. There was nothing else other than the infinite light of God. How does that turn into a creation which is very finite and full of multiplicity? And so we're not going to delve into it, but he explains that the key element is what's called Simpson, that God contracted, as it were, his infinite light to make space for a finite world. Now, the important thing about this is that each of these concepts applies to each and every one of us. And so it's not just that when God created the world, the first step was a contraction. Any person who wants to create, in a sense, has to go through either an initial period of contraction, or at some point early on, there has to be a contraction to distill the vision, the idea, the concept, the task, the purpose into a single identifiable focused point. And from that can come what we want to create. But if our head is all over the place and our time is all over the place, then it's very hard to create. Creation happens when we're able to focus on what we want to accomplish. That's called Simpson. That's called a contraction. And this is very important on a personal level. So it goes from cosmology to our own personal creative process. And without going into it, but much has been written that when you look deeply into the concept of Simpson and then a vacuum, because now there's an empty space, a vacuum, and then God shone in it a single kav of light into the middle of the empty space, and from that comes all of creation. Much has been written about how this parallels very much the description of the Big Bang and how this entire universe comes into being. So connecting it to the time period we're in, which is called Mima'atin B'Simcha, of lessening. So this is the most obvious one, because contraction is lessening infinite light into a single point. And for us, in our own creative process, it means the ability to focus on the task that we want to accomplish. Doesn't mean exclusively that we can't be doing other things at the same time. But what it means, and I'm sure people understand, if you want to accomplish something, that's going to take plans and work and discipline and priorities. There has to be a contraction of other things that we're doing in order to be able to accomplish this. So that's the connection of Mima'atin as far as Simpson. The next one is what's called hitpatchut, from the word poteach, to open, to expand a process. And the Ari came up with a number of symbols of how things come into being. The main point here is that to be aware of being part of a process. In other words, sometimes, let's say we look at other people and we see them one-dimensionally. We don't realize that they're in a process of growth, or they're in a process of their life. And sometimes in our own lives, that sometimes we're very aware that we're in the middle of a process, and other times we don't know what we're doing. Truthfully, we're just kind of going through day by day, paying the rent, just doing what we're doing, and we don't have a bigger picture. So the Ari came up with a number of symbolic ways to see how everything is in a state of process. One he called Nukuda, Kav, and Shetach. A point, a line, and an area. Now this goes very well with the creation cosmological symbology, that from a single point came this line of light, and from it opens up to our whole created billions, tens of billions of galaxies. A similar symbolic language for these processes, which is very important, is called Nekuda, Sfira, Partsuf. A point that becomes a sphera, like the 10 sphirot that we have here. And then the 10 sphirot combine into greater entities called partsufim. Partsuf literally means a face, but it means a full stature. Now, why this is important is we're going to see that actually the next one, the importance of this opening up. Now, the next one he came up with, also all saying the same thing really, is Ibur, Yenika, and Mochin. Ibur means pregnancy, Yenika means nursing, and Mochin, it literally means intellect, the brain, but it means maturing. And what all of this means is, again, it's a state of consciousness that when we look at the world, are we looking at it one-dimensionally or two-dimensionally or three-dimensionally or four-dimensionally? And the more, the wider our consciousness, the more we are aware of the cycles, the processes, the movement, the historical context of what is happening in the world. In other words, just for example, like an event can happen in a country. And if there's no context, if you don't know any of the history of the country or how the country came into being and who lives there and what the dynamics are, so this individual event will be like stagnant because there's no bigger picture. So the Ari, throughout his teachings, was constantly bringing this idea of things are in motion, things are growing, things are maturing, and that we have to train our minds to see how processes work. Now, the concept of mima'atim, of lessening, is very connected to the first one because we already explained it really, is that every process has to have a lessening in order to coalesce our mind, our time, our sense of purpose in order to accomplish this. Okay, the next one. The next one truly runs through everything the Ari taught, and that's called Hit Lab Shut, enclothement. Until the Ari, Rav Ginsburg gives this over all the time, that we can envision the Kabbalah as developing through three stages. The first stage was from ancient times all the ways up to the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cardavera, who comes right before the Ari. And it's called Hishtalshalut, that the teachings of Kabbalah, Hishtalshalut means like a chain of events, cause and effect. One thing leads to the other. One thing is higher than another. One is lower than a higher. One is farther, one is closer. Everything is a cause and effect connection. That's what's called Hishtalshalut. And all of Kabbalah was given over in this way. The phenomenal innovation of the Ari was what we call enclothement. And the best way we could describe this is by Sfirata Omer. That until the Ari, all of the teachings of Kabbalah were, there's Chesed, and there's Gevura, and there's Teferet, and each one has its energy, and one is on the right side, and one is on the left side, one's in the middle, one has to do with the intellect, this has to do with the emotions, the lower sphere have to do with our behavioral part of us. The Ari came and totally opened up the idea that all of the sfirot are contained in all the other sfirot. We have the four worlds of Kabbalah. Until the Ari, there's the world of Atzilut, and there's the world of Bria, there's the world of Yetzirah, and the world of Asiya. And they were like, there's a priority, there's a hierarchy, and one flows into the other. The Ari came and taught that's true on a certain level. But within each of the worlds is all the other worlds as well. That's why one of the famous statements of the Maggid of Mezrich was Atzilut, the highest world, is here. It's here. We also have this concept that Rabbi Nachman taught and many other Hasidic masters, that the world to come is a world that is always coming. It's here. The world to come is in this world also. There's also a world to come that comes after this world. But there's an aspect of the world to come in this world. You have the 5 levels of the soul. And the Ari came and taught that the nefesh, there's the ruach of the nefesh, there's the neshama of the nefesh, there's the chai of the nefesh, there's the yachid of the nefesh. In short, the teachings of Kabbalah then became so much more complicated in a sense, but so much richer. Now, this idea of enclothement is how we experience reality. The greatest enclothement is God is enclothed in nature, in the world. That is the primordial enclothement. It's not like God is up here, and then you have a world down here, and God, let's say, cares about the world, or there's a providence, but the Ari was teaching, and it's not like he was the first to teach us, but it was a great emphasis that God is enclosed in the world. That's why we say that the numerical value, the gematria of the name Elokim equals Hateva. Nature with a cap, the nature. The other enclothement, which we live with 24/7, is the soul is enclosed in the body. The soul is enclosed in the body. Spirituality is enclosed in physicality. And this we're taught, everyone's learned this many, many times, that one of the purposes of mitzvot and one of the purposes of the Jewish people is to take the physical and reveal the spiritual essence of the physical. In modern science, so we say, it's very parallel to say that spiritual is enclosed in the physical. So science now has revealed that energy is enclosed in matter. Matter is just the outside, superficial shell of how we experience the world. But what is matter? Energy. That's what matter is. So in all of these examples, we see the idea of enclothement. The other one, which is very important, because more than anyone, quite literally in all of Jewish history, revealed the secrets of reincarnation. The Zohar already speaks of reincarnation, but it's pretty in symbolic terms. No great details, but it is mentioned and it's very clear. It's talking about reincarnation, Gilgul Neshamot. The Ari just totally opened the gate and filled in the details. In other words, of the 8 sections of the teachings of the Ari, one whole one is about reincarnation. So what's the enclothement here? Previous lifetimes are enclosed in this lifetime. So when you take all of this and put it together, so this is the idea of that the Ari gave over. And like I said, it totally revolutionized the way we look at the world. Just like the teachings of Einstein completely revolutionized the way we understand the world completely. How we understand time and space and light and the relationships between them and the relativity. Since I mentioned relativity, Rav Ginsburg says that, and he shows in many ways, and it's connected to Hitlapshut, that the Ari was teaching about relativity throughout his teachings. Not that Einstein learned the Arizal, but the idea is it was already in the world. The concept of how everything is relative. So that's, in a sense, a deeper understanding of enclothement, because now we'll add the aspect of mima'atin. What's the lessening of hitlapshut? So when a higher entity encloses itself in a lower entity, there must be some tzimtzum. There has to be some lessening for it to happen. In our experience, it's the soul is now in a very, very finite, somewhat frail, time-limited physical body. And for a soul that is coming from the upper worlds and is an actual part of God above, so it takes a lot of lessening in order to be enclosed in the lower entity. Okay, and the last one is shvira, the whole concept of shvirat hakelim, the breaking of the vessels. Now again, this concept is part of the Ari's overall cosmology, but it has such an important part in our own lives. And this is simply that the previous world of Olam HaTohu, when the initial lights of creation entered into the vessels of the world of Tohu, the light was so pure and so exalted and so elevated and powerful, because each sphera thought they could handle it on their own. There was no hitlab shoot. There was no process with other sfirot. Each sphera thought that they could handle the light themselves. And one by one, they all shattered. And those shattered vessels becomes the material for this world. And that's why the Ari, he called this world Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification. Now, we already have the concept of rectification in the Elenu. We say the Elenu Prayer 3 times a day, and it was written approximately 2,000 years ago. And we say, L'taken olam b'malchut shakai, to rectify the world in the kingdom of God. But really, until the Ari, the ramifications of what is it? What are we fixing here? What's the process here? What's the history here? Why is it so important? And the Ari, he actually came up with a whole world view of the whole exile, which was very, very different. Because until the Ari, the exile was seen, and it's not that it's incorrect, but was a result of our sins. In other words, the temple was destroyed, the first temple because of 3 cardinal sins. The second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, other things as well, but causeless hatred. And that exile was, in a sense, a punishment for our turning away from God and not doing correctly. But the Ari came and he explained that, like in these 3 weeks, the 3 weeks begins on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz with the breaking of the Luchot, the breaking of the 2 tablets of the law. And it culminates in Tisha B'Av, which is the breaking of the temples. So this 3 weeks is all about Shvirat HaKelim. It's all about Shvirat HaKelim. And the reason that the Ari emphasizes so much is, again, it's not just a cosmological idea. The Ari taught that it was actually part of God's plan that in a certain way, the Jewish people had to be scattered all over the world in order to redeem, identify, redeem, help heal, help rectify all of the shattered pieces. And then before Mashiach comes, to bring them back to Israel, where the final tikkun could happen. And if anyone's familiar with, a little bit with Rabbi Kook's teachings about what's happening in the world, why are Jews coming back to Israel, what's the potential of the Jewish people here in the Holy Land, will recognize the teaching from the Ari. And so the breaking of the temple, the destruction of the temple is like Shvirat HaKelim. And the Jews going into exile are like the shattered points of light that are now taken all over the world. And now we have to redeem the light and bring it back to Israel. And this is like a Simpson, actually. Like what's happening, in a sense, is the gathering of the exiles is a Simpson. And it's all getting ready for a new development, the Messianic era. So these are the 4 basic concepts. I'll say them again. Simtsum, the contraction. Hitpatchut, opening up of life and development and process. Hitlabshut, which is enclothement. and fixing, because if something is broken, then we need to fix it. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in one of the most famous addresses that he ever made on the 28th day of the month of Nisan, is when he told the Kahal, I have done everything that I can do to bring Mashiach. The rest of the task is in your hands. And in that address, he said, the one thing I can tell you about what has to happen in order to bring Mashiach, we have to take the lights of Tohu and put them into Kelim of Tikkun. In other words, we have to take these great lights of the world of Tohu. See, in that world, there were tremendous lights and not enough vessels. This world has too many, it's such a materialistic world. There's too many vessels and not enough light. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe was teaching for Mashiach to come, we have to put those two together. We have to bring tremendous light. That's why Isaiah said that the purpose of the Jewish people is to be a light unto the nations. So we have to take this infinite light, but we have to make proper vessels that can hold this light. There's so much more I would like to give over here, but I always like to give time for discussion and questions. So I'm going to end with a bracha, and hopefully through the questions I'll be able to expand on some of these ideas. So let's end with a bracha. I'll just say like Rabbi Nachman said, if you believe you can spoil, believe you can fix. So the world is in need of great fixing. All of us are in need of great fixing. A good friend of mine who passed away, but he used to do the Misha Berachs. And when he would do a Misha Berach for sick people, at the end he would always say, anyone who's come into this world needs a refuah shlema, needs a healing. So we should have the merit that this Tisha B'Av, that we could really, really focus in on what is needed to fix ourselves, fix our communities, fix the Jewish people, and fix the world.